The arrows fell like rain. Sarah had seen many things in her 12 years serving as a border guard for the Northern Territories, but she had never imagined dying in a forest whose trees she couldn't name, shielding wolf cubs with her own body. The forest was called the Crimson Wilds by the pack, a place of ancient red oaks and violet wildflowers that bloomed even in shadow. Its rulers were the Nightfang pack, apex predators who'd held these lands for 1,000 years. 7-foot alphas with retractable claws and amber eyes that could track prey in near total darkness. A pack so powerful, so fierce that even other wolf packs feared to challenge them. They had joined the Northern Alliance 3 years ago, though integration had been difficult. Old ways died hard, especially for wolves who'd spent centuries ruling their territory with tooth and claw alone. Sarah had been assigned as a liaison guard, glorified babysitter for the diplomatic visits between her Omega Heavy pack and the warrior Nightfang. It was supposed to be easy duty. Safe, even. Then the Separatists attacked. The faction called themselves the Blood Moon. Wolves who rejected the Alliance, who saw cooperation with lesser packs as betrayal of their predatory nature. They struck during the Festival of First Shift, when Nightfang cubs underwent their coming-of-age trials in the deep forest. Sarah had been escorting the Alpha King's own children through the ceremonial grounds when the first screams echoed through the trees. The Blood Moon warriors emerged from the crimson undergrowth like shadows given form, and their traditional weapons drawn, bows and arrows, the old ways of killing. They weren't interested in negotiation. They wanted to send a message written in blood. The Royal Guard formed a defensive line, but it collapsed within minutes. The Blood Moon knew these forests, knew every path and hollow and secret way. Sarah found herself separated from the main group, running through unfamiliar terrain with her sword nearly useless against arrows, and her communication crystal shattered against a tree trunk. That's when she heard the whimpering. 3 Nightfang cubs huddled in a shallow ravine, their ceremonial leathers torn, faces streaked with tears and the scent of fear. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5 winters old, barely able to hold human form, let alone shift properly. Their guardian had fallen to Blood Moon arrows, and now they were alone. Prey animals in the bodies of predators. The eldest cub, Kale, she'd learned his name earlier, bared his juvenile fangs at her approach. His claws extended instinctively, though they were still blunt, harmless. "Stay back, Omega!" he hissed, voice breaking with fear, trying to sound like courage. Sarah raised her empty hands, sword sheathed. "I'm not going to hurt you." "We don't need your protection, weak blood." The insult was one she'd heard before, what warrior wolves called Omegas. "We are Nightfang. We are hunters." "Right now," Sarah said softly, "you're just scared children, and I'm not leaving you." The sound of pursuit grew closer. Guttural war cries, the whisper of drawn bowstrings cutting through the forest quiet. The Blood Moon were closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. The ravine was a dead end, bracketed by sheer rock walls that even wolf claws couldn't scale quickly enough. Sarah's tactical mind, honed by 12 years of guard duty, 12 years of being dismissed as just an Omega while still doing her job better than most, calculated the angles in an instant. The opening to the ravine was narrow, perhaps 4 feet wide, no more. If she positioned herself there, she could block it. Not forever, but maybe long enough. She moved to the gap and turned to face the cubs. Kale's amber eyes were wide with confusion and the first stirrings of understanding. "What are you doing? Get behind me, all 3 of you. Press yourselves against the back wall and don't move, no matter what happens. But now." The cubs scrambled to obey, yet something in Sarah's voice triggering their instinct to follow pack hierarchy, despite her being Omega, despite her being from another pack entirely. Sarah spread her arms wide, bracing herself in the narrow opening. Her leather armor would help, but it was designed for sword fighting, not arrows. The reinforced chest piece would stop some, but not all. Not nearly enough. The blood moon warriors appeared at the ravine's edge like vengeful spirits. 8 of them, their fur marked with ceremonial scars in human form, their eyes burning with righteous fury. They saw Sarah immediately, a single Omega blocking their path to the traitor cubs who'd been corrupted by Alliance weakness. The lead warrior, a scarred female with gray streaking her dark hair, nocked an arrow. "Move aside, weak blood. This is Nightfang business." "These children," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart, "are under Alliance protection. I can't let you harm them. Then you will die with them." The warrior raised her bow. The arrows fell like rain. The first shaft punched through Sarah's left shoulder with a sickening thud, the arrowhead tearing through leather and flesh like it was nothing. The impact spun her slightly, her body wanting to turn, to flee, to do anything but stay in this killing ground. She locked her knees, muscle memory from 12 years of guard training overriding every screaming instinct. "Don't move. Hold the line." The second arrow caught her in the thigh, the shaft biting deep into muscle. Her leg nearly buckled, fire racing up her spine, but she shifted her weight, compensated, kept standing. The third shattered against her chest plate with a sharp crack that she felt in her bones, fragments of wood and arrowheads scattering. Her ribs screamed at the impact, not pierced, but the force alone was enough to steal her breath. The fourth arrow found the gap just below where the armor ended, punching into her abdomen. This one burned different, not just pain, but a deep, awful wrongness as it tore through organs never meant to be touched. Sarah gasped, tasting copper. Blood in her mouth. Not good. Behind her, she heard Kale's voice, high, terrified, breaking on the words. "She's dying! We have to run! She's dying, and we have to—" "No!" Sarah forced the word out, pushed it past blood and pain, and the darkness creeping at her vision. "Stay behind me! Don't you dare move, cubs!" More arrows came. The fifth struck her right arm, pinning it to her side for a moment before she tore it free, with a scream she barely recognized as her own. The sixth grazed her neck, so close she felt the wind of its passing before it embedded in the rock behind her. The seventh, eighth, ninth came in rapid succession. Shoulder, side, leg. Each one a new flower of agony blooming across her body. Some struck armor and ricocheted away with metallic pings that seemed impossibly loud. Others found the gaps, the soft places where leather didn't cover, where flesh was vulnerable. Sarah's shoulder, her side, her legs, her arms. A constellation of pain mapping itself across her body, each arrow a burning star. Her vision swam, gray creeping in at the edges like fog rolling in from the sea. She could feel her body weakening, feel blood soaking through her clothing. Warm and wet and too much. Far too much. But she kept her arms spread wide, kept her body filling the gap. She could feel the cubs pressed against her back now, their small bodies trembling, their rapid breathing, their desperate claws gripping her uniform hard enough to pierce fabric. The smallest one was crying, she realized. Soft, whimpering sounds that broke something in her chest, worse than any arrow could. "Shh," she tried to say, though it came out as barely a whisper. "It's okay. I've got you. I've got all of you." The Blood Moon warriors paused to reload, drawing fresh arrows from their quivers with practiced efficiency. Sarah counted them through blurring eyes. 8 warriors, probably 20 arrows each in their quivers. She'd taken maybe 15 so far. The math was bad. The math was really, really bad. The scarred leader tilted her head, studying Sarah with something approaching curiosity, the way one might look at a fascinating insect before crushing it. "Why do you not fall, Omega?" Her voice carried genuine puzzlement. "You should be dead. By every law of nature, you should be bleeding out on the ground." Sarah smiled through bloody teeth, tasting copper and salt and the metallic tang of her own mortality. Because they're behind me, she said simply, each word costing her. And I don't move for anything. Not for pain, not for death, not for you. The leader's eyes narrowed. Foolish. Maybe. Sarah's smile widened, feral and terrible. But they're still alive, aren't they? So maybe foolish wins today. The warrior's face hardened. Not for long. She raised her bow, and the others followed suit. Another volley, another wave of fire and iron and splitting flesh. Arrow after arrow, each one a hammer blow against the wall of her body, each one stealing more of her strength, more of her blood, more of her ability to stand. The 15th arrow punched through her already injured shoulder, grinding against bone. The 16th caught her in the kidney, and she felt something inside her rupture. The 17th grazed her skull, parting her hair and scalp, blood streaming down into her eyes. Sarah's legs trembled like a newborn fawn's, threatening to buckle with every heartbeat. Her arms felt like they were made of lead, so heavy she could barely keep them raised, but she did. She kept them extended because her arms were the wall and the wall couldn't fall. Not yet. Not while the cubs still lived. In every arrow that struck her was one that didn't reach them. Mathematics of sacrifice. Geometry of protection. One body for 3 lives. Fair trade. Good trade. The only trade that mattered. Please, she heard Cale whisper behind her, his young voice breaking. Please stop. Please just stop shooting her. We'll come out. Just stop hurting her. No, Sarah gritted out, and somehow her voice still carried command despite the blood, despite the pain. You stay right where you are, cub. That's an order. That's a... The 18th arrow took her in the gut, just left of her belly button. Sarah's legs finally buckled, and she collapsed to her knees with a cry she couldn't contain. The impact jarred every arrow already in her body, sent fresh waves of agony cascading through her. But even falling, even on her knees, she kept her body wedged in the gap. Her arms dropped to brace against the ground, forming a barrier of flesh and bone and stubborn refusal. The cub's small hands clutched at her back, keeping her upright when her own strength failed. Don't fall, one of them whispered. Please don't fall. Not falling, Sarah managed. Just resting. More arrows came. 19, 20, 23, 27. She stopped counting after 30. Each impact felt distant now, like they were happening to someone else's body. The pain had transcended into something almost beautiful, a pure, crystalline agony that filled every sense. She was floating, drowning, burning, freezing, all of it at once. Somewhere distant she heard howls, the war cries of Nightfang warriors, yet reinforcements finally breaking through the Blood Moon's ambush lines. But they were so far away, and everything was going dark at the edges of her vision, the world narrowing to a single point of white-hot determination. Don't move. Don't fall. Hold the line. Just a little longer. Just until the cubs are safe. Just until... The Blood Moon leader drew one more arrow, this one different from the others. Black-fletched. Longer. Meant for killing armor-clad warriors with a single shot. She aimed it directly at Sarah's heart. Foolish Omega, the warrior said almost sadly. Die knowing your sacrifice meant nothing. The cubs will follow you into death within minutes. Sarah tried to speak, to curse, to say something defiant. But all that came out was blood. The warrior's fingers released, where Sarah braced for the impact, and heard instead a roar that shook the forest itself. A massive black wolf exploded into the clearing, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. The Alpha King. Even in wolf form, Thane Nightfang was unmistakable. 9 feet of pure predator muscle, with eyes that burned gold and fangs that could crush bone. He tore into the Blood Moon warriors with savage efficiency, a hurricane of fur and fury. Behind him came his elite guard, cutting down the separatists with brutal precision. It was over in seconds. The last thing Sarah saw before unconsciousness took her was the Alpha King shifting back to human form, his amber eyes finding hers across the blood-soaked ground. And in those eyes, shock, disbelief, something that looked almost like awe. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. 3 days later, Sarah woke to white light and the smell of healing herbs, sage and lavender, and something sharper, something that smelled like life being coaxed back into flesh that had danced too close to death. She was in a bed, soft, impossibly soft, like lying on clouds, with clean linens that smelled of soap and sunshine, and warm furs piled over her body. Wolf furs, she recognized distantly, the finest quality, from the winter pelts that only royalty could afford. Her body felt wrong, heavy and distant and not entirely hers, like she was wearing someone else's skin. She tried to sit up, and the world exploded into pain. Not the sharp agony of fresh wounds, but the deep, bone-grinding ache of tissue that had been shredded and was now slowly, painfully knitting itself back together. A gasp escaped her, and immediately a gentle hand pressed her back down into the pillows. "Easy, child. Easy now." The voice was female, elderly, warm with the kind of authority that came from decades of healing. "Don't try to move yet. You've been dancing with death for 3 days straight, and it's only by the grace of the moon and my skill that you're not still waltzing." Sarah turned her head, slowly, because even that hurt, to see an elderly wolf woman in healer's robes sitting beside the bed. Her hair was silver white, braided with healing charms. Her eyes were a pale blue that had probably been striking in her youth, and now just looked ancient and knowing. "Where?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak, her throat dry as bone. "Here." The healer held a cup to her lips. "Just sips. Your stomach's not ready for much yet." The water was cool and sweet, and tasted like the best thing Sarah had ever experienced. She drank greedily until the healer pulled it away. "Where am I?" Sarah tried again. "Nightfang Keep," the healer said, setting the cup aside. "The Alpha King's personal healing chambers, to be specific. The ones he reserves for wounded family members." Sarah's eyes widened. The Alpha King's personal. Why would he? "Because you took 43 arrows saving his children," the healer said bluntly. 43. I counted every single one as I pulled them from your flesh." She leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with those ancient eyes. 17 of them should have been fatal. By every law of nature, medicine, and common sense, you should have died in that ravine." The healer paused. 4 pierced major organs. 2 nicked your spine. Any deeper, and you'd never walk again. 1 went straight through your lung and out the other side. Another severed a major artery in your thigh. She reached out and touched Sarah's hand, her fingers cool and dry. 3 days I've been working on you. 3 days of the finest healing magic this pack possesses, combined with every herb and poultice I know. We've rebuilt you more than healed you. You have more synthetic tissue than original biology in some places." Sarah stared at her, trying to process. I survived?" "You survived." The healer's voice gentled. "Because apparently you're too stubborn to die when you've decided to live." She squeezed Sarah's hand once, then released it. "The Alpha King has been here every day, sometimes for hours, just sitting, watching you breathe." The healer's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. "The cubs, too, young Kyle especially. He refuses to leave for more than an hour at a time. Says he has to make sure you're still fighting." "Are they—" Sarah's throat tightened. "Are they safe? The cubs?" "Safe and whole, thanks to you." The healer smiled. "Not a scratch on any of them. Though I think you gave them nightmares for life. Kale keeps waking up screaming about arrows and blood and a wolf who wouldn't fall." Tears burned in Sarah's eyes. I couldn't I couldn't let them die. They were so scared, so small. I know, child. The healer's voice was impossibly gentle. I know. A knock at the door interrupted them, sharp and formal. Enter, the healer called, straightening in her chair. The door opened. Yes, and Kale walked in. The cub she'd shielded. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came two more cubs, his siblings, a boy and a girl, both looking at Sarah with wide, wondering eyes. And behind them, flanked by half a dozen royal guards, came a massive male with black hair shot through with silver and amber eyes that seemed to look straight through her defenses and see everything she was trying to hide. Alpha King Thane Nightfang. Sarah had met him before, briefly, during the diplomatic functions. But seeing him now, here, in this intimate setting, with his children and his full attention fixed on her, was different. He was enormous, even for an alpha. At least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that could carry mountains and a presence that filled the room like a physical force. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, handsome in the way a blade is handsome, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. But it was his eyes that caught her. Amber. Pure, molten amber, with flecks of gold that seemed to glow in the soft light. And in those eyes, exhaustion. Deep shadows underneath that spoke of sleepless nights and worry that ran bone deep. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Maybe he hadn't. Sarah tried to sit up, propriety and protocol demanding she show proper respect to royalty. Stay down! Thane's voice was deep and resonant, carrying the kind of authority that made obedience automatic. You've more than earned the right to remain comfortable, Guard Sarah. He crossed to her bedside, with long strides, moving with a predator's fluid grace despite his size. Up close, Sarah could see more details, the fine lines around his eyes, the silver scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands that spoke of a warrior who still trained despite his crown. This was no soft king who ruled from a throne. This was a wolf who'd fought for everything he had and would fight to keep it. Kale approached the bed, flanked by his younger siblings. The girl clung to her brother's hand, her face still pale. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. In Kale's hands, he carried something wrapped in crimson cloth. The young cub's eyes, so much like his father's, burning amber with gold flecks, met hers, and there was no contempt there now. No dismissal, no weak blood or omega trash. Only respect, reverence, and something deeper that Sarah couldn't quite name. My people have a saying, Kyle said quietly, his voice steady despite his youth. That true strength is not in the hunt, but in the stand. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a ceremonial blade, ancient, beautiful, its hilt carved with running wolves. You taught me this, Guard Sarah. You taught me that the bravest wolf is not the one who strikes first, but the one who refuses to move when others depend on their protection. Sarah's throat tightened. Among the Nightfang, Kyle continued, we honor those who protect the pack above themselves. He held out the blade, and Sarah realized with shock that his hands were trembling, not with fear, but with emotion. You are no longer weak blood to us, no longer Omega. His voice cracked slightly. No longer outsider. He placed the blade in her hands, the weight of it solid, real, heavy with meaning, and bowed low, his forehead nearly touching the bed. You are Vimar, he said, using an ancient word she'd heard only in the oldest stories. Mother of the brave, and you will always have the protection of the Nightfang pack. Tears burned in Sarah's eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. Kale straightened, and his siblings stepped forward too, each bowing in the same manner. Then, to Sarah's absolute shock, Thane himself moved. The Alpha King, ruler of the most powerful pack in the north, a wolf who bowed to no one, dropped to one knee beside her bed. His amber eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that stole her breath. Not just gratitude, not just respect, recognition. "You stood for my children," Thane said, his voice rough with emotion, held tightly in check. "You took arrows meant for them, and you held a gap against 8 warriors with nothing but your own body and your refusal to fall." His large hand, scarred from 1,000 battles, covered hers where it rested on the ceremonial blade. "I have led Nightfang for 20 years. I have seen warriors fight and die. I have seen courage in many forms." He paused. "But I have never seen anything like what you did in that ravine." "I just did what anyone would do," Sarah managed to say, her voice hoarse. "No." Thane's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You did what only the bravest would do, what only someone with a heart larger than their fear would do." He took a breath, and Sarah could see him wrestling with something, some decision. "The Nightfang Pack owes you a debt," he said formally. "By the old laws, you may name any price. Any boon within my power to grant." Sarah looked at him. This powerful alpha who'd terrified her when they first met, who represented everything her own pack had taught her to fear about warrior wolves. And she saw, not a predator, but a father, a leader, a wolf who understood sacrifice. "I don't want payment," she said softly. Thane's brow furrowed. "Then what do you want?" Sarah looked at Kyle, at the cubs who'd huddled behind her, who were alive because she hadn't moved. "I want to know they're safe. That's all. That's enough." Silence fell over the room, heavy and meaningful. Then Thane did something that made even the healer gasp, made the guards shift uncomfortably, made the entire world seem to tilt on its axis. He placed his other hand over hers, covering both her hand and the ceremonial blade together. His hands were warm, calloused from years of weapon training, and impossibly gentle for their size. "You say you want only their safety," he said quietly, his voice dropping to something intimate, meant only for her. "But I offer you more than that. Much more." His amber eyes held hers, intense, burning with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Stay. Not as a guard, not as a liaison, not as someone we owe a debt." His voice dropped even lower. "Stay as pack, as Nightfang, as mine." Sarah's breath caught. The room seemed to spin slightly. "I'm Omega. Your pack is warriors, alphas and betas. I can't. You stood against 8 warriors and refused to fall even as they filled you with arrows." Thane's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You endured pain that would have killed wolves twice your size who've never known real courage. You protected my children, my heirs, my heart, with your body, when my own warriors failed to reach them in time." He paused, and his jaw clenched with emotion he was fighting to contain. "You are more warrior than most who carry the title. More brave than wolves who've spent their whole lives training for battle." The healer was watching with undisguised interest now, a small smile playing at her lips like she knew something Sarah didn't. Thane took a breath, and something shifted in his expression. The Alpha King's authority cracking slightly to reveal the man beneath. Vulnerable, uncertain, almost afraid. "And more than that," he continued, his voice roughening. "When I saw you in that ravine, when I shifted back to human form and saw you on your knees, arrows in your body, blood on your lips, still standing, still protecting my children, even as you died." He stopped, throat working as he swallowed hard. "I felt the mate bond snap into place." The world seemed to stop. All sound ceased. The guards stopped breathing. The healer went very still. Even the cub's eyes went wide. "What?" Sarah whispered, the word barely audible. "You're my mate," Thane said, and the words came out like a confession, like a prayer, like something he'd been holding back for 3 days and could no longer contain. "My true mate. the one my soul has searched for, the one the moon chose for me. He looked almost uncertain, an expression Sarah had never imagined seeing on the face of an Alpha King, a warrior who commanded thousands, a predator who'd never known defeat. "I know this is sudden," he said quickly, words tumbling out like he was afraid she'd stop him. "I know we barely know each other beyond diplomatic functions and formal meetings. I know you have every reason to refuse. I'm from a warrior pack that your people fear. I'm Alpha when you're Omega. I have 3 cubs already, and responsibilities that would consume your life." He paused for breath, and Sarah saw his hands trembling slightly where they covered hers. "But I'm asking you to stay anyway, to let me court you properly, to give me a chance." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Please." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Her, an Omega from a minor border pack, a guard dismissed as just liaison duty by her own people. A wolf who'd spent 12 years being overlooked and underestimated, mated to the Nightfang Alpha King. It was impossible. Insane. The kind of thing that only happened in old stories, and even then only when the storyteller had been drinking too much mead. And yet, she looked at Kale, at the cubs who'd hidden behind her, who'd felt her blood soaking through their clothes as arrow after arrow found its mark. She looked at the ceremonial blade in her hands, still warm from Thane's touch. She looked at Thane himself, this powerful alpha who'd dropped to one knee beside her bed, who'd bared his soul and his uncertainty, who was asking, not commanding, requesting, not demanding. And she thought about standing in that gap, arms spread wide, arrows falling like rain. She thought about Kale's voice, broken with fear and awe. She didn't move. The human, she didn't move. She thought about Thane's eyes when he'd found her, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious and brave and worth saving. Not just another disposable guard, another Omega, another nobody. And she thought, maybe brave is just another word for willing to try, for willing to believe when believing seems like the most dangerous thing in the world. "I'll stay," she said softly, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I'll try." Thane's face transformed, the hard lines softening, the Alpha King's mask cracking completely to reveal pure, unguarded joy. His amber eyes brightened until they seemed to glow, and his hands tightened on hers just slightly. "Thank you," he said, and his voice held reverence usually reserved for prayers to the moon, for sacred oaths, for things too precious to name. "Thank you." Kyle let out a whoop of pure delight that echoed off the chamber walls, his siblings joining in with excited yips. The healer was smiling broadly now, wiping suspiciously bright eyes with the corner of her robe. Even the guards looked pleased, some of them exchanging knowing glances like they'd been waiting for this, hoping for it. And Sarah felt something warm unfold in her chest, spreading through her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Not quite love. Not yet. She barely knew him beyond formal functions and his reputation. But the beginning of it, the seed of something that might, if nurtured, if given time, if they were both brave enough, grow into forever. 6 months later. The ceremony took place under the full moon, in the ancient clearing where Nightfang Alphas had claimed their mates for 1,000 years. Sarah wore robes of silver and crimson, the colors of the pack, and around her neck a pendant, a small shield carved from bone. Thane had commissioned it specially. "So you never forget," he'd said when he gave it to her, "that the bravest among us is the one who stands." The pack gathered in a massive circle, hundreds of wolves in human and animal form, all there to witness their Alpha King claim his mate, his Omega mate, his brave, fierce, incredible Omega mate who'd taught an entire pack what true strength looked like. As Thane took her hands and spoke the ancient words of claiming, as he placed his mark on her throat and she felt the mate bond settle into place like coming home. Sarah thought about that ravine, about the arrows, about the choice she'd made to stand when falling would have been easier, and she understood, finally, what it meant to be Omega, in a world that valued only alpha strength. It meant being the shield that doesn't break, the wall that doesn't fall, the guardian who stands between darkness and those who cannot yet stand for themselves. The arrows had fallen like rain, but she had not moved, and in not moving she had found everything she never knew she needed. A home, a pack, a love that saw her worth when the world had taught her she had none. 3 years later, epilogue. Sarah stood at the window of the royal chambers, so one hand resting on her heavily pregnant belly, where their first child grew strong and fierce. Below in the courtyard, Kyle, now a young warrior in his own right, was training younger cubs in defensive positions. Remember, his voice drifted up, the strongest position is the one that protects others. The bravest warrior is the one who refuses to move when movement means abandoning those behind them. Thane came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his warmth chasing away the autumn chill. He tells the story every time, Thane murmured against her hair. The Omega who took 43 arrows and didn't fall. It embarrasses me, Sarah admitted. It inspires them. Thane turned her gently in his arms. You changed this pack, Sarah. Changed how we see strength, how we see Omegas, how we see courage. He placed his hand over hers on her belly. Our child will grow up knowing that the bravest wolf in the pack was the mother who stood in a gap against impossible odds and refused to move. Sarah looked up at her mate, her alpha king, her love, her partner in all things. I was just doing what anyone would do, she said, the old refrain. Thane smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face into something beautiful. No, my heart. You did what only a human would do. He paused, corrected himself. What only the truly brave would do. He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. You did not move, he whispered against her lips. And in standing firm, you showed us all what it means to be truly strong. Below, Kale's voice rose in the ancient teaching chant, the cubs' voices joining in, the shield that will not break, the wall that will not fall, the guardian who stands alone, protects, and saves us all. And Sarah, former border guard, dismissed Omega, now Luna of the Nightfang pack and mother of the brave, smiled. Because she had stood when falling would have been easier. Because she had not moved when movement would have been death. Because 43 arrows had fallen like rain, and she had caught them all with her own body, so that 3 small cubs could live. And in that moment of ultimate sacrifice, she had found not death, but life. Not weakness, but the truest strength. Not an ending, but a beginning. The arrows had fallen like rain, but the wall had not fallen, and never would.